Good morning, everybody. Happy Mondays and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Deputy Political Editor, everybody, Ben Glaze. And we're going to go through the most interesting stories of the day. We're going to discuss what the earth Boris Johnson's up to now. And through it all, we want you to ask us your questions. Dig into the comments. Let us know whatever's on your mind and we'll do our best to calm you down a little bit and answer you about what's going on. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the vaccine rollout, that jab of hope, which is going to mean that the ill, the elderly, the vulnerable, and those who care for them are going to be able to relax a little bit and start mixing. But deeper into the paper is this row taking up most of the morning's headlines, which is the possibility of a no-deal Brexit as we crash into yet another deadline. Now, only last week, we were told this was in the bag and it was all going swimmingly. But talks with the EU seem to have hit a stumbling block again. So, Ben, you understand politics. What the hell is going on now? What are they playing at?
Start of another week, start of another crunch week for Brexit. It seems a while since we've had crunch Brexit weeks, thanks to coronavirus. We've been dominating the headlines. And it is a bit of a cliche to say this is, make or break for a Brexit deal, but this time it actually is. The talks are taking place this morning in Brussels. You remember they were taking place in London last week because they're switching back and forth each week. Now, what's happened is the deadline for the deal is officially December 31st, the absolute deadline. So that's when the Brexit transition deal runs out. But because it's got to be signed off by the European Parliament, by European leaders and by Westminster, in practice, the deadline's a lot earlier. Now, the talks, they've hit stumbling blocks along the way. They focus on three key areas. Now, the first of those is fish. Fishing accounts for 0.1% of Britain's economy, of our GDP, but it's a hugely symbolic issue because we want to be able to catch our fish, in inverted commas.
Europe, because we don't eat it, because it's mostly mackerel.
That's it. Most of it gets exported. The European boats have traditionally, since we joined the common market, as was in 1973, been able, under the common fisheries policy, to take some of our fish. We want to be able to allow them. So this is us in control, sovereign United Kingdom post-Brexit, saying you can catch X amount of our fish. Obviously, we disagree with Brussels on how much we should be allowed. Now, there's claim and counterclaim about what's been agreed. In truth, nothing's been agreed yet. So that's one element, and that's probably the most symbolic. Second element is a level playing field. Now, that's where Europe wants us not to be able to undercut Europe, so we gain an unfair competitive advantage. And likewise, Europe wants us not to be able to do that to them. And then the final, the most boring of the three elements is of a deal. How would it be released? How would it be governed? Now, all those are crystallising today in Brussels. Those are the three biggest elements. So everything else is sorted in the deal, but those are three quite big parts of it, and it's been going on for months like this, and here we are with days to go now until the real deadline, and it, potentially just hours to go, and they still can't agree.
No. And well, Mike asks, is the government seriously going to push through a vote this week to scupper parts of the withdrawal agreement when it will undoubtedly lead to no deal? This is two other things that are going on, I think you're referring to, Mike. There's the return of the Internal Markets Bill to Parliament, which is this thing they've got which upsets the Good Friday Agreement. And there's also a new taxation bill which effectively tears up some of the withdrawal agreement. And Mike's saying, are they seriously going to do this? Now, this is really interesting because I was reading something written by Tom Shivers on Twitter the other day. I was talking about game theory. And the best way, when you're playing chicken, this is the idea, and this is what he was arguing Dominic Cummings was big on. When you're playing chicken, the best thing to do if you've got two cars heading toward each other, if you really want to win, is to rip out the steering wheel, throw it out the window, and make sure the other guy sees what you're doing. Because that way he's so terrified by how insane you are that you are definitely going to crash into him that he will give way and he'll swerve. And that was kind of the explanation for how the Brexit negotiations are being done. We were prepared to rip out the steering wheel, no deal, fine, bang, let's all have a big collision. This is part of it, isn't it? Bringing these bills back to Parliament is all part of that. We can live without you.
We've got these two pieces of legislation, the UKIM bill, UK Internal Markets Bill, that's in the House this afternoon. There's liable to be a vote on that around about 9 o'clock. Now, if, and it's obviously a very big if a trade deal is struck before 9 o'clock tonight, it's possible the vote won't be proceeded with. The government can pull it. It's government legislation. It's entirely up to the Prime Minister whether or not that gets put to a vote. Now, you have this running in parallel to the talks because it can, in the government's eyes at least, continues to hold the European Union's feet to the fire. Like, you don't think we'll do this? We will do this. Look, we're still doing this. We're still doing it. Oh, and you've still got your trade talks going on. And then I think that will go ahead. I think that will be voted on because whatever happens, even if an outline deal is agreed tonight, it's still got to be signed off by those various elements. What's less clear is the taxation bill, which is the second part you're referring to, Susie, which is back in Parliament on Wednesday, or comes to Parliament on Wednesday, rather. Now that would be more serious because the government, by doing it on Wednesday, is a full 48 hours rather from where we are now. If they did that, that would be worse than the UKIM bill. Both of them can get pulled. You don't ever, every bill that gets passed by Parliament never has to actually be enacted. You can pass it and it can lie on the statute book without ever coming into effect. There was a piece of legislation that, in fact, there's several pieces of legislation that put through under New Labour, which have never been enacted. Others have taken up to 10 years to come into force. But just having it on the statute book would upset Brussels enough that it could collapse the trade talks. So you will have the UKIM bill go through, I suspect, this evening. It will put more pressure on the negotiators to strike a deal because if you get a deal, you don't need the UKIM or the controversial elements of the UKIM bill, nor do you need the taxation bill. So you can get rid of both of those and go, oh, well, look, our bluff works. I mean, you might not say that because it's not very diplomatic, but in truth, that's what they would say. But it's high stakes stuff. And yeah, it's all designed to put in more pressure on the talks because, you know, they definitely need more pressure at the moment, don't they?
Oh, yeah, that's what... Frankly, we've all just completely forgotten about Brexit, haven't we? Now, keep asking us your questions, everybody. Get into the comments and ask us whatever's on your minds. You've got Ben here. Pick his brains. Let's see if there's anything in there. Charlotte asks, unbelievable. This is disgraceful. I'm fuming. First COVID, now this. He's got a lot to answer for. Get him out. He's a limp fish. Yes, Charlotte. I don't think we're going to get any disagreement here. But what we've got now is a situation, and Gordon Brown talks about it in the spread in the Mirror today, and he says, you know, we would be, if we don't get a deal, we'd be in an economic war with Europe because that would cost us a very deal in terms of food, drugs, and everything else. But we'd also be in an economic war with America because the election of Joe Biden last month has massively strengthened the EU's position. You're not going to get a trade deal with America now unless you have a trade deal with the EU and unless you continue to respect the Northern Irish border issues and the Good Friday Agreement. And elsewhere today, we are hearing from sort of ex-Treasury Mandarin Nick Macpherson, who says this looks like a confected row in order to build drama so that the Tories can sell it internally to their party, to their constituencies, to their supporters, to say, look, we have really held the EU's feet to the fire, guys. Honest, we have. They've given in to everything we asked for, apart from these other 4 things about fish. Don't worry about that. And, you know, they're not actually in a position to do much demanding anymore, are they, Ben?
There's always a row with Europe before deals. There has to be, because each side needs to be able to go back to their people and say, look, we fought really hard. It was always close there at the end, wasn't it? Almost didn't happen, but, you know, we got through in the end. I mean, it's the charade that we go through. I mean, it particularly happens in the run-up to Christmas because in the teens week, so 16th, 17th, is when Brussels leaders, the EU leaders, the heads of state and government have their final meeting of the year. And everyone wants to go home and, you know, get ready for Christmas. So it's all this high-stakes stuff. It's not like it's all, you know, have the Secret Santa and pass around the eggnog. Wow. And they do it, and then they can go back to their domestic audiences, because all this is done for a domestic audience. And you can say, look, I went to Brussels on your behalf and I fought and I won, and this is what we've brought back. So yeah, we go through this. It's something we all should be aware of, that this does happen. It's a lot of it is for show. You know, we've written stories before about a pantomime. Obviously, there are not many pantomimes happening this year, thanks to Corona. So I don't think we've used those headlines. But
Boris is giving us one anyway.
Exactly. And the Joe Biden element, you're quite right. Joe Biden, obviously, he's got Irish heritage. He actually understands Ireland, Northern Ireland, the border. He cares about it. And when he was in the Senate for 40 years, there or thereabouts, he took a great interest. Foreign affairs was his thing. I think he was chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in the Senate. So he does understand all this and his heritage. He is on the side of the Irish, if you like, which in turn is obviously part of the European Union still. So he won't just ignore it in the same way that Donald Trump obviously hails from Scotland partly. He was very proud, very liked to play up his British roots, talked about the Queen a lot, obviously loved having tea with Her Majesty. It's not the same with Joe Biden, it's different. He sees things through a very different prism, and he also joins the international fray a lot more than Donald Trump, who basically, well, he said, didn't he, in his inauguration speech in January 2017, America first. That was his, fair play. He said that and he did that. Whereas Joe Biden will have a much more internationalist, multilateral approach.
Yeah, but Ollie asks, well, you can't throw it out and suddenly remain. No, this is why we're going through the Brexit deals. The UK spoke and wanted to leave, and the government can't go back on that. Exactly. They can't reverse it. Boris Johnson has very much anchored his entire career on Brexit, which he was in two minds about to start with anyway. Just to point out, I voted to stay. You're right, Ollie. This is the course that we are set upon, and there's not very little we can do about it. So what it's going to boil down to, I reckon, tell me if I'm right or wrong or being skeptical here, Ben, is that this is going to come down because, as you've said, you've got the Irish, you've got the Germans, you've got the Maltese, the Italians, everybody having to sell this internally to their own voters and their own people, as well as here in Britain. And so it's going to come down to a choice of words in an agreement which can be ambiguous and interpreted different ways for different people on different sides of the debate. And what you need to achieve that, the equivalent of like a Good Friday Agreement for Brexit, something which will make everybody happy on all sides, the only way you can achieve that is with some brilliant lawyers or some brilliant statesmen. And Boris Johnson not only is none of those things, but he has also not really got many of those on his team either. So he's on a sticky wicket. My prediction is I think he's going to have to give in at the 11th hour because he has no choice, but he's going to have to do it in such a way that he can sell it as a win.
It's a deal, everyone has to compromise. There was a trade negotiator who said, and time in the morning, I won't quote exactly what he said, but along the lines of, a good trade deal only happens when both sides are upset with the outcome, because you go into it with, this is what I want to do, this is my shopping list, this is what I want, and then obviously you've got to scratch off bits of your shopping list because it's not compatible with the other side's shopping list, and eventually what comes out of it is a compromise. That's to coin a phrase, that's the art of the deal, is a compromise. So that is what will happen. The reason fish is such a big issue about all this is because of France's fishing fleet. In the same way ours was symbolic to the United Kingdom, France's is symbolic to them. So Macron is facing the same fishy issues, if you like, as Boris Johnson is here. So Macron needs to be able to sell the deal to the French fishing industry. What's interesting, of course, is there are several countries in Europe that are landlocked, couldn't care less about the fishing industry. Now, is France, one of 27 European Union nations, going to torpedo this deal, which on the high altar of fishing, which Poland, for example, is not interested in the fishing industry. It's got other problems. Germany, of course, does not have a big fishing industry. It wants to sell us BMWs and Audis and Mercedes cars. That's what their industry is focused on. They're not bothered. So Angela Merkel, leader of the biggest country in Europe, most powerful leader in Europe, she's the one who could bring Emmanuel Macron rounds. That's what the British are hoping, to seeing, look, Manuel, are we really gonna send this all down because of fish? So I do think in the end, wiser counsel will prevail. There will be a deal, and yeah, it'll upset quite a lot of people, but ultimately it's better than not having a deal.
Exactly. So I think things will probably bubble along, but we'll have to see how we go. Right. Keep asking us your questions, everybody. And we want to know what you're thinking about Brexit and about our next story, which is two really important things on page 2 of the Mirror. Now, the page lead there is about the extra food bank meals for children by Christmas. They did about 600,000 last year. They reckon it'll be 1 million this year at the Trussell Trust, never mind the other millions for adults, thanks to Corona and the economic crisis. But down inside there, what we call sidebars, it's two really big important stories that I think if I was editing the paper today, I would have given more show, not only so that we can show it easier on this Facebook Live. But there is an independent think tank, the Institute of Public Policy North, which says that the North was so unequal compared to the South when we entered the pandemic, thanks to decades of austerity and centralisation, of Treasury policies, which meant investment didn't go into the North, that they were hit harder by coronavirus, that they had an extra 12 deaths per 100,000 people in the North compared to the South, because they're so much more deprived in that part of the world. Now, this is levelling up. This is what Boris Johnson was supposed to be sorting out. Obviously, he's been busy for the past year and hasn't been able to, but the need to level up has been massively demonstrated by coronavirus and this higher number of deaths that we've seen. So what are the prospects, Ben, for an actual stronger northern powerhouse? Because Boris has promised some money, but it tends to be money that's nicked from elsewhere, doesn't it?
That's it. It's a finite pot of cash, and if you want to spend more on one thing, you end up spending less on another. Now, this is fascinating research. But it's quite dry. It should be said, it's quite dry research, but it has a huge impact on people's lives. This research from the Institute for Public Policy Research North. It's looked at three towns: Blackpool, Middlesbrough, and Hull, and highlights those as being particularly badly hit. Now, because certain parts, there are some difficult truths in this, right? It's not comfortable talking about some of these. Parts of the North are obviously more reliant on the state, whether that's through welfare or through employment in the public sector, where it accounts for a higher proportion than employment down south. So we are talking about, these well-known north-south divides. Now, if you go into a crisis with worse public health as well, which, public health issues are exacerbated in the North. If you go into a public health crisis with that, you will be disproportionately hit. Now, this research today kind of lays out there. The underinvestment that the IPPR study talks about through 10 years of austerity, that disproportionately affected the North as well. And now we're living with the consequences. Boris Johnson's victory in the December 2019 general election owed itself to three things, right? Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn leading the Labour Party, and his pledge, Boris Johnson's pledge, to level up. Now, when we were covering that 6-week campaign, Brexit was easy to understand. Jeremy Corbyn not playing well on the doorstep was easy to understand. Levelling up, what is it? It's a vague concept. Levelling up is just a made-up phrase, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Boris Johnson won plenty of support with that, particularly around what we talk of as the red wall seats. Labour's former strongholds, those traditional Labour heartlands across the Midlands and across the North. And Boris Johnson, whether you agree with it or not, he clearly won support by offering people hope with this pledge to level up. I know that some Conservatives were very, very surprised with how well that message played. Very surprised with the size of their majority. They realise they now owe those constituencies, those new MPs who were elected, those Conservative MPs, they owe them. They have to pay back on this levelling up agenda. So they have to try and work out what they mean by this. Now, tackling some of those long-standing inequalities, and they are very long-standing. They were not just caused by the last 10 years of Conservative Lib Dem coalition.
Yeah, they're structural, aren't they? They're so deep that it takes billions and billions and billions.
And it won't be solved in what's left the 4 years of this Parliament. So however much money you throw at it, these are long-standing structural difficulties and inequalities. But you can make a start on doing it, and that is what the levelling up agenda is. And this report today shows how much work there is to do.
Yeah. Now, Alice asks, do you believe there is a genuine north-south divide? Is it possible it's to create northern and southern tension? Well, Alice, I'll quote from the story here. The North has more child poverty and lower life expectancy than the rest of England, according to this report. You will die sooner, and you will have sicker, hungrier, more struggling families and children in the North. And that shouldn't happen, and that shouldn't create tension. What might create tension, perhaps, is if a government is serious about this, they start diverting cash from the south to the north and from the cities up to the northern cities, because then people down south here, where I am, would start getting antsy that their potholes weren't getting fixed and so on and so forth. But, it shouldn't create tension between us as a country, really.
The use of the word, Alice uses the word tension there. I mean, Does she mean, Alice, do you mean tension that, leads to riots where the North and South meet somewhere in the Midlands, Watford Gap? I don't think it creates tension. What I do think it creates is resentment. And that's potentially worse, because you have one side of the country, one part of the country, resenting its family, friends in another part. If more public money is spent in the North, and it's taxes down south that go up to pay for it, and your pothole, Susie, it will lead to resentment. Equally, if you've spent the last 50 years in the North watching all the money be pumped into London and the Southeast, and the people there earning more, living longer, less child poverty, of course, if you're in Blackpool, Hull, Middlesbrough, the towns talked about in the IPPR report, you may end up resenting that extra spending that's been, and the better quality of life there is down south. We are a divided country, and I do think, maybe not tension, but I do think resentment, I don't think it will create resentment. I think that resentment exists.
Yeah, unfortunately. And it's one of those things, Alice, where people see one thing, like a pothole, and think that is an isolated issue that affects only them. Now, my road outside my house was resurfaced last year because of the potholes. And this year it has flooded so many times that the repairs are already busted, and there are more potholes out there. And the reason that it's flooded is because there's a river down the road. And when I was a kid and lived around here, it flooded once or twice a year. If you were very unlucky, couldn't get the school bus down here. It now floods every couple of weeks. And that's because of climate change. It's because we have warmer, wetter winters. And the fact that we have a pothole issue here in Kent is because of a global phenomenon that we actually would all need to sort of sacrifice something for and give something for. And then my pothole issue isn't a big thing. So whatever happens to us, whether in the North or the South, it seems to be something that just affects us in Manchester or Tunbridge Wells or anything else. It's probably a big thing in the middle of COVID and all the money that we've lost because of the way Rishi Sunak's misspent it. We shouldn't really start resenting each other. So if anyone feels resentful, stop. It's someone else's fault. And Vince points out, remember, there are pockets of deprivation in the southeast. Yes, indeed. As I often tell people, the borough of Sherwood, which is part of Tunbridge Wells, is one of the poorest places in the UK. So it's worth bearing some of that in mind. It's not all.
The flip side of this point is there are obviously some very affluent areas of the north as well. If you think of places like Harrogate, they're doing a lot better in the north than places like Hackney or Tower Hamlets. In London. So yes, perfectly fair point, Vincent. Yeah, there are anomalies. We're talking about broad brush regional situations here rather than the pockets that you quite rightly have deprivation in the southeast that you rightly identify.
Yeah, and unfortunately some of the money that's already been earmarked for the north has gone to the richer, more regular Tory voting places, not just the red wall seats. But elsewhere on that page 2, down the bottom, it talks about a story that Northern England was worst hit by coronavirus, and it also suffered more than the South during the 1918 Spanish flu outbreak. And Newcastle University has done a study which showed that the death toll in 1918, 100 years ago, was 6 times as high in Jarrow as it was in Surrey. And the Northern Health Sciences Alliance also found the North had 12 more deaths per 100,000 than the rest of England. Now, I was reading a book last night written by Daniel Defoe in about 1670 something about the Great Plague of London in 1665, and they are fascinated by a couple of paragraphs that said the poorer, more deprived bits of London he was writing about had the worst outbreaks of the plague, because people were living together and they were less healthy and all the rest of it. They're living in closer proximity. And if that was happening in 1665, and if it happened in 1918, why, in the name of God, is it still happening in 2020? That's a disgrace, Ben. It's just a failure of education and history and humanity, isn't it?
I find this report fascinating because, the Spanish flu came right at the end of World War I, and it was spread by troops returning from the front line back to their home countries, to their communities, and spreading it. Fast forward 101 years, and coronavirus, in part, was spread by people jetting back from skiing breaks in the Alps and from business trips to the Far East, and spreading it in their local communities down the pub. Now, we've got two very different, but also in some ways similar reasons for those two different diseases a century apart spreading. But the fact that the North was disproportionately hit in both does play to those two factors you identified, that you're more likely to have, you're starting from a worse base from public health in the North, and you're more likely to have people living in close proximity to each other, working more cheek by jowl. You know, if you think, you're more likely to have mines up north than you were in the southeast. You're more likely to have the factories 100 years ago and today, where you can't work from home. You know, you have to go to the factory line. You're still closer to people. Obviously, now we've got social distancing enforced, but at the start of all this, back in February and March, people were working cheek by jowl, and that would have been the case 100 years ago for the Spanish flu. So it's for those reasons, that we haven't moved on in 100 years, and it still disproportionately affects those communities.
Exactly. And there's one thing worth bearing in mind, brings us in a neat circle back to our first story of Brexit, is one of the things in this level playing field they talk about, which Boris Johnson is trying to negotiate with the EU, is that the EU wants to protect workers' rights in Britain in the UK after Brexit, and make them the same as they are in Europe. And Boris Johnson is trying to argue that we can have different employment rights in this country. Now, perhaps he means just having them improved and better than Europe, but I'd be amazed, because the only reason our employment rights improved at all was because we were members of Europe. So the possibility of our all having fewer employment standards, fewer working rights, would perhaps increase all those things that Ben's just been talking about there, about working cheek by jowl, about the hours that you work, about the pay that you get. And here we are, 400 years, 460 years on from the Great Plague, actually talking about reducing our standards of employment so that we are in a worse state in terms of public health in the future. And Boris Johnson is actually trying to negotiate the right to do that, which is amazing. And keep asking us your questions. We've got one more story we want to discuss, and then we'll let you go about your days. But keep asking us your questions, get into the comments, and we'll try and answer them for you. But we want to talk about the must-read story of the day, and this is about Jill and John Daly. Now, they worked at their local Dogs Trust here in the UK and cared about animals, but for a whole bunch of different reasons that's worth reading the story for, they went to Thailand and they started... they set up a dog foundation tackling the problem of stray dogs and cats. They took to the streets and anaesthetised stray animals and then neutered them so that they couldn't breed and make the problem worse. And they've even managed to get the law changed in Thailand for dog and cat meat to be banned as a food, from being eaten. And Jill's passed away, but there's an animal sanctuary there with her name still on it. And I just thought, Ben, it's a great example of how doing something that you care about and actually making a concrete change. We haven't all got to go to Thailand, have we? But there's a lesson there for all of us, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel passionately about something and you enjoy it, being able to do that and put that to good, as John and Jill Daly have done, that's rewarding for them, and it's also rewarding for society. I mean, Jill sadly died in 2017. But John is going to pick up a Mirror Animal Hero Award, and obviously posthumously dedicate it to her as well as an award for both of them. And this is for the work they've done in Thailand, taking dogs off the streets, neutering and spaying them so that they're less likely to proliferate, and getting the dog meat off the menus in Thailand. So it's a lovely story, and how lovely it must be for John to have that memory of Jill. You know, it's not just a photograph on the mantelpiece. There's a centre named after her, and then this evening they're going to get this award. It's a lovely story.
It's great. You should really make an effort to buy the Mirror today and read that. Now, Richie asks, can we get a proper look at your Christmas jumpers? I'm not wearing one, Richie. I'm wearing a Rude t-shirt. Because why not? Ben, let's see yours.
Yeah, I'm wearing a Cardiff City Christmas jumper, the Bluebirds. It's only the second Christmas jumper I've ever owned, and I wasn't going to bother getting a new one because we only wear a Christmas jumper a couple of times a year. But being stuck at home and not having to wear a suit to work for the next month, until I don't know when, I thought I might as well get one this year and support my local club. Well, not my local club, my home club.
Yeah. Okay, well, there you go, Richie. Why don't you lot talk about Biden cheating, says Richard? Because he didn't. Richard, because he won fair and square by a greater majority than Donald Trump did last time, which Donald Trump called convincing and a landslide. So it's a convincing landslide for Joe Biden, and that's that, pretty much, unless you're talking about him cheating at cards or Monopoly or something. And if you've got evidence of that, let's see it. We'll do the story. Send it to us. Now, thanks, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Ben, for joining me and explaining Brexit. And please remember, as we go through the next couple of days, and Boris Johnson keeps saying that he's, playing cards with our future, and don't worry, he's definitely bluffing and he's definitely won. It's all a load of rubbish. We'll probably get a deal. We'll probably be all right. And just don't vote for these people again, because they're idiots. Right. Thanks, everyone. See you on Wednesday. Bye.